name tags with pronouns.
And those I know.
Come in. Let me give you a piece of paper. There you go. We got a couple seats here available. Thanks for being here. It's a full house. If you get too warm, we can put these down, get some shade if you need it. Okay. All right. You're going to need a pen or share a pen. We have people with pens. Or write it in your blood. Whatever works for you.
I did not come prepared.
Yes, there's not a lot of writing, but we do need to do, so share your pen. It's like the feeding of the 5,000. Oh, I have a pen. So we have a little less than an hour. And going around and introducing will take too long, I think. So let's just get to the conversation, okay? Here. Paper. Yeah, I'm giving away free paper.
That's why I came.
That's right. You get another one. All right, so my hope is during the conversation that this is actually a conversation. I already had a chance to talk for 35 minutes. A way to help each other. Here, a piece of paper.
I have.
What do you got? Okay. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is when Jesus tells people that before they can help someone take a speck out of their own eye, they got to take the log out of theirs. And he uses the two different words very precisely, right? Because how many people do we know when we see it in action who will ridicule someone, point someone, and yet you know in their lives they're struggling with big things as well. And or the people who protest so much about something and it turns out it's who they are, right? We know that's a thing. So for us in the church, we should do more sharing of information. We should help each other out. And I don't think we do it enough. We're trained to be lone rangers at seminary, even though they always say, oh, you're not going to do it. No, we do. There's a sense of competition between our churches too often. And sharing resources is a real struggle. People might do it in small ways, and some things are appropriate, some things are not. But I will tell you that just about every church in Reading that eventually closed, I had conversations with them about merging and working together, and they all refused. I mean, I told them, I would say, look, your building is falling apart. We can't be in your building. Our building is pretty awesome. So let's share, put your name on the building with us. That's sharing, right? No, they refused. They would rather close. When I first came to the Reading area, there was a church not far from us in the city that had over $2 million in an endowment. This is 1999. But they couldn't use the money because it was so specifically earmarked. They had 2 paid soloists and a full-time musician, part-time pastor, and 7 people in the pews. They eventually closed, and the money was distributed. Some, I was told, to some of the members. We have an endowment as well, but one of the things I did 15 years ago, a woman, this is hilarious, she was a really quirky, funny character. Did you ever, Betsy's a member of my church, did you ever know Mrs. Snow?
No.
Ever meet Mrs. Snow?
No.
Nobody knew who she was, but somebody called me and said, could you go visit her? She's really, really sweet, she needs a visit. So I went to visit her, and I opened the door, and I had called first, and she said, you know I'm not giving the church any money. And I said, yeah, oh, fine. I'm here for communion with you. That's all I'm here for. It's your money. And I would visit her and bring communion regularly. And I'm going to double check to make sure we're live here, by the way. And every time I'd visit her, she'd say the same thing. And then after a while, she said, well, I'm going to leave a little money to the church. And I said, okay, that's fine. Whatever, do what you want to do. And this went on for, 2 years, until she said, I'm going to give half my money to the church. Mm-hmm. And I said, great, but don't give it to the endowment. Give it to the church. Because if you give it to the endowment, it will never see the light of day. Because we had an amazing guy in charge of the endowment who held that thing so tightly that we got almost no money out of it, and we would have been closed. So I said, give it to the church. Check comes in, $640,000. None of it for a new Harley for me, by the way. This was on my wish list, but nobody paid attention. So our endowment guy gets the money, and he's like, you can see he's about to pop, right? I can't wait, we gotta put this in the account. And I said, no. It's going to the church. The church decides, consistory decides. And by the way, from a UCC poly point of view, your endowment committee does not decide what to do with the endowment money. The consistory decides what to do with the money that comes from the church. So I said, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna change, in a legal way, we're gonna change the rules to a way that we can have access to more money, so that we can do more ministry, and then we can talk about putting that money into the endowment and building it. And he had to say yes, otherwise it would have been in our checking account making 0.5% interest. So then we got a gift for $430,000, and then we got a gift for $400,000. I didn't even know the one person. All I did, he was a brother of a member, and I just would call him every once in a while. Nobody had any, his brother had no idea he had any money. You don't know who has money. You don't. So you have to just treat everybody with kindness, and they respond the way they want to respond. If they want to give money to the church, which I think people should, I talk to people about that all the time. Leave 10% in your will to the church. Every little bit helps us move forward. So that is part of why we've been able to continue doing what we're doing, is we don't have the membership to support this giant building and a full-time pastor and a couple of music staff and other folks' staff. We don't have, we supplement it with the money we get from the endowment. We have to share these things and talk about these things and help us each other through it. So you have a piece of paper and access to a pen. I want you to write 3 things about your church that would not ever change, that are unique to you. If you have 3, if you have 2, that's fine. 1, 2, 3 things that are unique about your church that you know for sure will never change. Unique to your congregation, you think? You having a hard time thinking of things?
Yeah.
So, all right, let me give you a really silly example. Not silly, but we have a priceless carving in the front of ours on our altar. Come on in. We have a chair right here.
Okay.
We have this priceless carving, amazing carving. We can't even afford to insure it. That will never change. That will never be removed. Something like that. anybody against having that picture taken? Anybody need more time?
This won't be reported to the FBI.
It will not be reported to anybody. Okay.
What?
Your full name?
Want fingerprints?
What do you think I gave you the papers for? Okay. Now, put a line underneath that thing. Just a line across the paper. Let's just say 1, 2, or 3 things that if you could, in your church, you would stop doing tomorrow. As many as 3. You could do 1 or 2. I mean, just there must be something you don't like that's done in your church.
Stop doing.
Yes, that you would stop doing tomorrow if you could.
Want to start doing?
Stop. We'll get to that. Now, you may be in a perfect church. Because if you can think of nothing that you would stop doing tomorrow, you may be the problem. So I want you to think beyond yourself and think, if you were somebody walking into the church, what thing would you stop doing tomorrow?
I've only been a member for like 6 months, so I don't know yet.
All right, how about your last church? There's probably 8 reasons you left, but how about your last church? Just something that really bothers you, that you do, that you really want to stop doing. Think of one's good enough.
Burning down the building is just not an option.
Always an option.
I'm not, there's no barriers here. I'm not judging anybody. You
You want to
just
stop burning down the building?
No,
I'd like to.
I know, that's what.
Would you like to stop keeping it not burned down?
It glares at me when I say it's not the worst thing that could happen to it.
Need more time? Don't want to rush, but we have a limited amount of time together. All right, so I'd like, pass your papers from this back row to me, please. Hope your name's not on it, but just pass it to me. I'm not going to read them. I'll just eventually, I'll recycle them. Pass them this way, please. Pass your papers this way.
He's coming down
Okay,
here and.
now,
Let it go, let it go. He said pass it over.
All the rest.
no, just the back row.
Okay.
Oh,
Now,
just the back.
all of you, pass your paper to the person behind you.
So you need here, I don't know if you want to pass it back. You want to pass yours back, or 2 rows back.
And I need one more up here. Nope, you just pass it to the person behind you. That's all.
You should have got it from in
Oh,
front
the
of you.
first to the second,
Yeah.
to the third.
Right.
Okay, here you go.
Hold on, no, this.
Oh, you don't, it's bad for that.
You're gonna be.
Oh, we
gets hers.
have uneven numbers here.
Yeah.
You don't have one. Who has extras?
Wait a
Who
minute.
has extras? Somebody's got extras.
She has, I have my own.
You have your
But
own.
are we going road to go?
Did you get
back
somebody,
or wait?
why don't you give
I
me
didn't
yours?
get anybody's.
Give me yours.
Okay.
I'll give that to you.
Okay.
Who else has extra?
She doesn't have one
I
now.
have to have one now.
Here's one.
There must be an extra one. I thought-
Is that empty?
This is empty.
Okay.
Here's one.
And who has an extra one?
It went out.
Anybody else?
You got one now?
But you don't have one still.
No, I don't have.
How did that happen?
We're not lined up evenly.
It doesn't matter. Does anybody have, there's gotta be enough for everyone.
Everybody started with one.
Yes.
Someone didn't
Yes.
do it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I
Well, then you can partner up, okay? Someone gets an F, wherever you are. All right, now, I want you to read the piece of paper you have in front of you to yourself. That first list of comments, the first one, the things about your church that you would never change that are unique. Do any of those things have any meaning to you? Who are reading what you're reading? Are they meaningful to you? In what way?
This one says that individual giving will not increase ever.
And that's unique to that congregation. It's not. All our churches suffer from that. When we did a thing in Reading about 15 years ago, where all the churches went from church to church to talk about working together, which, by the way, none of them ever agreed to work with anybody, including us. We kept saying, well, how about this? No. All of our churches had at least 20% of the people who didn't give anything, another 20% who gave $1 a week. Some churches had 80% who gave nothing. So that's not a unique thing. Okay. Now, the next section. What would you stop doing today if you could? Do those things have any meaning to you? Are any of them so weird you'd like to read them to us? And don't admit that it's yours if you don't want to. I don't want anybody to get embarrassed or anything. I just want to. Is anything on that list shocking or weird to you? No. So we all have the same problems, right? That's the point of this. We all have the same problems. So how do we fix those problems? How do we make things change when people are so set on holding on to them, holding on to the past, right? Controlling the lives of the church. Why do we hold on to the things from the past?
False security.
It's this, life sometimes seems very chaotic. That's at least what I find in my congregation. That people think that the church has to be a place where nothing changes so that they find that comfortable, peaceful place there that they don't have elsewhere in their lives in a way. But it's a false sense of security because it really isn't. Because they don't feel any more peaceful at church than they do anywhere else really. And the problems that they carry around with them anywhere else are still there as well. And now you even have the additional problem of you have this church that you think is your safe place that is hanging on by a thread because it doesn't have enough to survive.
Right. So we hold on to things for a lot of different reasons that give us comfort. So I'll tell you a story about this guy. I told you about this Pentecostal guy. He and I did our doctorate ministry together, and really exceptional guy. And he told a story about the place you sit in church. Who sits in the same place every week? You all do, probably?
Yeah.
And I have to, I'm up front, right?
She does because she films.
Christian House, okay. Yeah, and if you go to another church from a vacation, do you sit in basically the same area? Or do you sit someplace else? You sit someplace else. Why is it easy to do that, but not change your seat at church?
Because you don't want to ruffle feathers with someone who might be sitting there.
You might not want to. Or, here's his story. He was serving this church and they were growing. And they had to build a new building. They were in an old congregational church that was just not big enough. So he announces that the leadership has announced that they've decided as a congregation they're going to move to whatever, build a bigger church, more modern. And this woman who was in her 90s, who'd been in the church her whole life, stopped coming to church. So he went to visit her. And he said, what's the problem? He knew. What's the problem? And she said that I sat there with my husband. I sat there with my children. I sat there with my grandchildren. And they've all moved away or died, but they're still there. Right? Now, I probably would have said, wow, that's really touching. I understand why you're feeling that way. But we need to do this. Right? I would probably do that. Not this guy. He, about 2 months later, calls her up, says, I want to show you something. And picks her up. The new church building is under construction, sanctuary set, and the pews are all there, and there's a cutout. Exactly where this woman sat in the last church. And her pew was there. All these modern blonde wood, he said, and then this dark oak pew stuck. Now they had the other one that they were going to put in there eventually, because she was in her early 90s. So, but he brought her in. Now, this woman had been had been a stay-at-home mom, had worked as a cafeteria lady later in her life, but she, it wasn't about money. It was about her. And so he made, and he said she was overwhelmed, and came to church every Sunday, was involved the same way she had been until she died. After she dies, they get a check for $1 million because she had money. Now I know I've mentioned this twice already, but a lot of times we are so afraid of losing giving. Right? When Josh talked about his experience, a quarter of the members, most of them the big givers, left. And so that's why another reason why we don't want to change stuff, because people control us with their money. So, what was my question at the end of my talk? Where's Jesus in this? Where is Jesus in the decision making around money in most of our congregations? He's not there. He's not there. And he talked about money more than any other topic in of the sayings that we have, right? How we use it, how we make it. It wasn't that you shouldn't have money and use it. It was how you did those things. So when we make decisions about changing, there's always going to be a financial factor, right? And do we make the decision based on money, or do we make it based on the mission? Now, how many times, does anybody have any experience in your own church where you had an opportunity, someone brought up a ministry idea, and it went to your consistory or board, and it got shot down because what was the first thing they said?
There's not enough money.
Not enough money. We experience it, and it's a struggle for me all the time to try to deal with people who make these decisions. Why do we do that? Why do we shut it down like that, do you think? It is a convenient excuse. Now, sometimes there isn't any money. That's the reality. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes you got to choose something over other things because more people respond to that than they do. I mean, there are realities. I understand that. I've been doing this a while, so I get it.
It's just a gut reaction. And a lot of our people in my church right now, I have a lot of that grew up with parents that lived through the Depression and whatever else. All their life, money has always been one of those topics to be, to be frugal, to save up, to whatever. And it's just so ingrained that what is left behind it is the imagination of what you can do.
Right.
Because you only see the things that you can or shouldn't do because they cost money.
Yeah.
I have folks in my leadership who don't like the idea of doing things if we won't benefit from them in terms of money or in terms of people in worship or whatever, which I kind of struggle with that. I don't think it should just.
I think we all, yeah.
And I know that's not unique, but I just wanted to bring that up. That would like to just do things for the community and not worry about whether or not we will get people in worship or whether or not we will make money for the church.
Yeah.
Then there's the other factor of those who ultimately do leave the church because they are discontent with the changes that are taking place, and the mourning that as pastors we go through when someone leaves, and that the congregation goes through when someone leaves. We're not addressing that either.
Yeah, we take that personally, don't we? I mean, no matter how much we know, it does. It hurts all of us because we have a relationship with people, right? If you're in a strong faith community, you should have relationships with each other. And when somebody leaves over something like that, I mean, we had one couple leave our church in 2005, now this is 6 years before we even started ONA, because the UCC had supported marriage equality. And so they left our church. And I said, well, why, how does this not affecting us right now? What's the problem? And they just could not be a part of a church that was like this. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, you can't control them, right? So so when we did ONA, like I said, we were the first church in Berks County and in the immediate vicinity. And that was a tough nut to crack. We had 81% yes, which was enough for me and the leaders in the congregation to go with that. Much lower, we probably would not have done it. I mean, because you don't want that huge a number. The problem is whenever you vote on something that's a moral issue, everybody loses, honestly. But of the people who voted no, about half of them stayed. Because I went to visit all those people afterwards and said, I know you disagree with this, but can you live with it? Can you give enough grace? And some of them did, and they're still very active in the church. Others couldn't, and that's a choice they had to make. But this thing divides us. I was a Methodist. I'm mourning over my United Methodist siblings with what they're going through. They're struggling with that. But they've been struggling with it since 1972 or something. So
At some point, you're gonna get somewhere.
you know, it's and the truth about that issue is that there is no middle ground. Right? You don't condemn people, you don't judge them, but you do say, you either support a person for being a person or you don't. There's no middle. Well, you're sort of this, we even had, after we voted, we had a couple people who voted yes, who left after I did 2 same-sex weddings. And I went to them and said, what's going on? Well, marriage is between a man and a woman. I said, well, a man and a couple of women, according to the scripture, but don't let me get all biblical on you. They just couldn't get past that, their bias. So a lot of the disagreements we have are our biases. I don't know if, again, I'm picking on Betsy, but I don't know if Betsy remembers, but there was a big kerfuffle at our church over the Lord's Prayer. I grew up with trespasses, but most UCC churches do debts. And I did a different version. I think I did sins or something. And a couple of people were furious. So the next Sunday in church, I asked for a show of hands. How many people grew up doing trespasses? 3/4 of the people there raised their hands.
Were they ex-Catholics?
Well, Methodists, Episcopal, I mean, almost nobody does that.
They weren't members of that UCC church because I grew up in that church and we always did debts and debtors.
Exactly.
Always.
That's right. And so it was that way, but the church had changed dramatically, and we were basically a multi-Protestant congregation now. So people from all walks of life, Catholic, Buddhists even. So they didn't have the same baggage, right? It is baggage because I have in my head, I say trespasses. So what I said to them was, so we'll do all of this stuff, and everybody will be happy once and then unhappy the next time. And, or the hymns we sing, or a new hymn. Yeah, it was written in 1827. I mean,
New to us.
new to us, yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
I've got people who are disgruntled because I changed the words of the doxology. So it's not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some people were just like, it's the same tune. So,
Man, why don't consider that modern? We use one from a blue hymnal.
Yeah. The first time that I said the Holy Spirit was she, there are a couple of people who gagged.
Oh, yeah.
Literally. Even though it's biblical. Again, I don't want to get all biblical on you, but there it is.
We're having, in Our Father being said, Our Father and Mother, and so that's, that wasn't agreed in council or anything like that, but I think there's some few members that don't agree with it, and then so there's, as a tradition, and therefore, I was probably always saying she quietly to myself anyway, but, because I didn't feel thought on, like being a male with a beard and a throne and all that. When I mentioned that to a Catholic that I was talking with who was running for office, he goes, oh, well, no, don't go there, because he does believe in the throne, the veil cloth and all that. So I said, oh, okay. But,
We dare to sing it, responsibly, the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
And I had a person leap over that because, you know.
So there's a lot of pettiness, right? And pettiness is all about our ego and the thing we think is more important than other people. And it may not seem petty to us, and we probably all have our own, right, our own stuff that we, when something happened, oh, that was weird. I was at a church on vacation, this church, and they used the John reading that probably everybody else had, and it said, the Jews. And I went, oh. I always say the leaders of the Jews or some of the people or whatever, because the Jews has fed anti-Semitism. It shocked me to hear him say, and my wife didn't even notice, right, because it's ingrained in my head. So there are these things, again, when I keep talking about the question of change, one of the things I work with, when I first got to the church, every church actually, I do an Elijah thing on the empty chair. But when I sit in a meeting, or consistory or a committee meeting, not everyone, because I didn't always have to do that. Most people were pretty cool, but there were some people at some of these meetings who get angry and yell at each other. Anybody have anybody yell at a meeting? So to head this off at the pass, I would put an empty chair next to me, and nobody could sit in it. And when we had the meeting, and someone would say, "What's the chair for?" I said, "Let's imagine that Jesus is sitting with us, and every word we say and every decision we make has to pass Jesus." And if people would get obnoxious, which didn't happen that much, but if they would start to get angry or whatever, I would just pat the chair, and they would look at it and go, "That darn Jesus." So I think one of the ways we bring about change is, first of all, we learn how to say no if there's something that really is really wrong. And churches do make wrong decisions sometimes, I think. But secondly, again, to put Jesus at the center of the decisions we make and say, and if it doesn't concern Jesus, then let's just pick somebody, you know? Like, I have no patience for picking out the color for the kitchen, honestly. I don't care. And you sit in a meeting and they go around for 30 minutes about what color it should be, and I would just like go, oh, could you just pick somebody? I don't care about that. That's not ministry, right? So how, if you've made some positive change, how have you done it? How have you moved your congregation in a way that did it in a peaceful and orderly fashion? Yeah,
I have something.
please.
So, you know, COVID, like many of us, forced everyone to reimagine or rethink how you were going to do this hybrid, well, first virtual worship and then hybrid, right? We had a lot of older people who, you know, they go to other churches and they see screens and they say, "You never have that, that's never happening." That's, you know, that was like the Antichrist to them. And so here came COVID, and then we kind of came back into church and we kind of did a hybrid thing. And, you know, at first we started with, you know, a laptop. If you can imagine this big sanctuary sitting at the front, and they're like turning it, you know, and okay. And I said, you know, can we just put somebody, and then they couldn't get the sound right, you know, music's playing, and online it's garbled, and they said, this is, can we just get like a Bluetooth speaker? I'm like, no, that's not what's going to resolve this. And I said, first of all, you need a PTZ camera, you know, so we got that. And then, so, you know, we did something else to get the sound right. And then I remember, so we could hear whoever was speaking. If some people were online speaking, we could hear them, but we couldn't see them. Somebody, one of the board members said, "Are we going to be able to see them?" And I literally, okay, this is what you want to do. And I drug this TV out on a cart, and it sat in the front. And, you know, literally, you know, we live with it, and there were cords everywhere, people were tripping. And so literally, you know, I finally convinced the council, you know, with some well-timed pictures of like what you're looking at, that, you know, you're really gonna have to invest in something different. And we walked them through this journey of, you know, after we vetted some contractors and what this would look like, and there was all sorts of discussion of like, well, is it gonna go tastefully with the sanctuary? We don't want TVs, we don't look like a bar, you know. You know,
And those are valid concerns.
they were,
Yeah.
but you know, you had to like walk them through it, and finally, you know, I sit here today and we have, you know, spent good money on well-placed screens and a nice high-quality LCD projectors, and our worship is such, it's hybrid, right? So people can be online and people can also participate. So if you are at home, ill or away, and you want to be the worship leader, you can Zoom in, remote in, and we can have you, you know, like we just had our new pastor's installation, and she had a minister from across the country. She had her family from all over the country and friends from across the pond who all participated in some way, not only just were able to sit there and view it, but also participated in the worship. And yeah, so we got them there, but I mean, honestly, it was pulling out that TV screen, and they got comfortable with living with that TV screen in the front of the sanctuary, you know, talk about looking like a bar. Here we go, you know, cords and all.
Thank you, that's really good. Did you have your hand up before? I thought someone had their hand up.
If I wanted my brother to ever go to church, we'd have to put a bar in.
You have your bar.
Yeah, I think I realize that sometimes you have to gracefully let people be who
Yeah.
are, who need to. You mentioned when there was a couple who was upset that with the gay marriages, right, in the congregation. We weren't doing anything great, but you know, when the General Synod voted to approve them, right?
Yeah.
So she was in our Sunday school, and they're big leaders in the congregation, and she just wanted she and her husband just wanted us to leave, you know.
Yeah.
And I just let it go, you know. Let them have what discussions they need. You know,
There's only so far you can go, right?
They need to have. And then she was in the Sunday school. I remember one Sunday she said, "Well, Pastor, you've been real quiet on this. What do you think about this?" And I said, "Well, you know, I understand that you're passionate about this. What I have to say, it's not my priority. That my highest priority, I think, is to reach out to those who may not be here, who are different from us. And you know, I understand that you talk about say, well, let's talk Bible, okay?
Right.
So I said, I understand you're passionate about this, but as I read the Bible in the New Testament talks a lot more about diversity within the congregation than it does about, you know, sexual preferences or orientations." And she said, "Oh, okay." And then the next week, she and her husband they came, and we had the fellowship time after the service every week, and she let people know that they made a decision to leave the church because they didn't want it divided. And during that reception, I considered it a reception, right? During that fellowship time we had, they shook hands and said their goodbyes, and they left. And one of the elders was really upset that they left, and so called me up and asked me that if I could go and visit them because they were leaving. And I said, "No, I can't do that. They made the decision, and we all said our goodbyes."
You have to give them that grace.
And it was healthy for the congregation to be able
Right.
to do that.
That's right. I saw a hand up back here. Yes, go ahead.
My church, and you're all gonna laugh, my church is hypersensitive to change. I originally hail from that church nearby you that handed money out to their members, and that's the church of my youth. Anyway, my church is hypersensitive to change. And in January, I had an issue with them. And I brought up at January's consistory meeting that it would be nice if they would allow me to set a table in the chancel to serve communion from, which is so common anymore. And after they polled the congregation in February, the consistory voted on it. And I had communion on that table in March and now through current. But they were afraid that it was very Catholic. And then I explained Mercersburg and Zionist to them, and that made a little bit of light on to it. And so far they've been good with it, but change with real basic things is sometimes a huge fight, a huge difficulty, because my church was built in 1939. Nothing has been improved since then. You can use the toilet and wash your hands at the same time. It's this little closet. It's incredible.
I'm glad you clarified what you
Oh, the place is incredible.
Where's the, sorry, I'm not a minister, where's the chancel? I don't know what you're
It's
talking about.
up on the altar area.
Oh, an altar.
Not against the wall, but out. Which has been going on since the 80s in
Yeah.
Protestant churches.
Oh,
So,
yeah, oh, I
yeah.
see, okay.
When I started changing the worship service to more of that style, and people were all upset about it, and then I say, well, when you go to vacation, go to church, and they come back with bulletins, they say, they do the same stuff you do. And I go, I didn't invent this stuff, you know? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little more about the regeneration process, the renewal process? I don't think any of us has a crystal ball that shows us what the church of 2050 is going to look like.
Right.
And yet, when we put out some really radical, crazy change possibility that they just are shocked by, I don't know. How do you move through that process in a way that brings them along? Example, removing pews.
Right.
We're in the process of removing some pews. The leadership was actually okay with removing all of them, but not everyone else in the congregation was there. So we're removing a few at a time. And yet those of us in the leadership see the possibility of opening this room for so many more uses in the wider community, not just for us, but for the future. And how do we move through that process in a way that honors both the future as well as those who've grown up in this space?
Yeah, sometimes churches will do a compromise where they'll have pews in the front and then the opening in the back where they can have dinners or gatherings or whatever. Depends how large it is. Removing all the pews is a big step.
It's a huge step.
Yeah, and for many people, it's like church, right? You go and sit in the pew. But we know that modern churches are not putting pews generally in, or if they do, it's sort of a hybrid sanctuary use. But change in general, I think. So again, when I was a United Methodist pastor, I was leased a year at a time to a church, and every year that lease would be renewed, and I could be told at any time the lease is over, you're going elsewhere. So for me, getting stuff done fast was important, and I was a hammer. I just brought the hammer and changed stuff. And it was okay because they were kind of used to Methodist ministers doing that because that's how we lived our lives. When I went to the UCC, after I got over my the first spring, I started having panic attacks. I did, and I realized it was because that's when the bishop calls and says, Steve, I've been praying. Woe to those who have bishops praying for them. I realized that I had time. I didn't have forever, but I had time. So if I didn't, and I told the congregation, I said, you probably don't know this yet, maybe you do, but I get everything I want. It might take me 5 years, right? I might have to come back for every year for 5 years. I'll give you a quick example. We have a weird parking thing where the parking lot the main thing next to the building used to go out onto the street. So to get to the parking lot, you had to go down, turn, up, in the back, drive up, and then walk all the way around in the front. Awful. So I have to tell people this to help them find the parking lot. So I said, why don't we just change the direction of that? So people, I say the church is right next to the church, come in, park, we got spots for you as a visitor. I had a woman on Consistory block this for 3.5 years. One Sunday, our treasurer comes up and he says, we have to repave. Be a perfect time to change the direction. I said, great, let's meet on Sunday and talk about it again. We meet after church, she's not there. We let her know, but she wasn't there. We changed the direction. She comes back and she's furious. And I said, why does this make you so mad? She said, I just don't understand why we have to make it so easy. I never believe it. When I say those words, I don't believe I'm saying them. But this is what she said. And I said, of course we need to make it easy. We want people to be part of our community. Why would you? It's just that because it's always been that way.
Yep.
So sometimes it takes a long time to bring about change. And then sometimes you just, like, I do dumb stuff like my first church, we had a Japanese Jesus painting, Easter on the front wall. It was painted by a woman from Japan who was brought over from Hiroshima as a bride, and then she died. But she painted this Japanese Jesus in this all-white church. It's hilarious. So I saw it, and I said, well, it's Easter, and here we are coming up to Lent. I'm just going to take that painting down and put it over here safely, and then we're going to have just a blank wall. Well, it turned out there was 40 years of dirt. People walked in and were like, oh my God, what did you do? So we met after church, and I said, well, how does it make you feel when you look at that? She said, I feel sad and lost and lonely. And I said, yeah, it's Lent. And they went, oh. Turns out, for the next 25 years until they closed, they did this every Lent. They painted the wall, thank God, but they take Japanese Jesus down and put him in the closet and bring him out on Easter morning. Sometimes you just do it, and people go, and you use it as a teachable moment.
I think the pandemic was really good for that too, in terms of so we had 2 worship services, one at 8:45, one at 8:30 and one at 10:45. And we didn't have enough people for 2 worship services. And I hated doing 2 worship services because for some reason everything else had to happen in between those 2.
Yeah.
They wanted Sunday school and confirmation class and Bible study, and coffee hour and whatever else in that time. And it was not possible because you don't have the people to spread them around. Well, the pandemic, we're getting us online. We're like, look, we're online. I'm not doing 2 worship services online. One it is. You can't watch one, watch the recording.
Right.
And nobody saw a problem with that. And we always had, in the summer, we only had 1 service at 9:30. I'm like, so why don't we do 9:30? Because we used that from the summer. People will remember if there's 1 service at 9:30. And then after the pandemic, once we got back into the sanctuary, we said, well, we don't want to clean in between 2 services. So is it okay if I still keep it at one service? Everybody went with it. And then we still only had 1 service now. And that was perfect. Some of it's just, these interrupters are really good. But I also think that when we come to churches, a lot of times, I know I was told, don't change anything right away, or give them time.
Yeah, that's bad.
Well, I remember when Beth was ordained, and we met, and she's like, any suggestion? I said, change something. Change something every week. To change something. I said, you have to create a culture of change.
Yeah. You know, seminary professors have done incredible disservice to us by saying that, because that is the dumbest advice you could have. Because what you do is you don't change anything for a year, and then you start changing things, and they say, you're a liar. Mm-hmm. You said it was fine, now you're changing it. You're a liar. So you maintain, I maintain that you get trust by saying to folks, here's the reason maybe we should do this. And this is why it makes more sense. And let's try it once. And if we don't like it, we won't do it again, but let's try it once. And also, when you build up trust, right? When you have, when people believe you're doing it for Jesus, right? And for them, not just because you think you're smarter than everybody else, which sometimes we clergy can come across as being that way. We have to be really careful about how we make changes, but we need to make them if they're for the right reason. Now, I saw a couple of hands, we have a few minutes
Yeah,
left. Go ahead.
real quick, just in my working career, I always use something's changed by evolution, some by revolution.
There you go. That's exactly right.
And with Northern, it's like my brain.
Well, tell us when it comes. That's excellent.
Speaking to what Suzanne was saying, when I was a member at Valley Forge, and Rosemary can attest to this, our last pastor did a priorities process with us, a visioning process where we developed a mission statement, and then we discerned what God was calling us to in terms of worship, in terms of how we become closer as a faith community, and what we do in the world. And for me, I'm just going to speak for myself. At that point, I didn't know what a disciple was. So we were, at least I was, starting at the beginning. And then we got a lot of new people, including gay families with children. And then 5 or 6 years later, we did it again, because a lot of those folks hadn't started with us at the time. So then the top thing that came up the second time was social justice, which wasn't even on our radar at Valley Forge when we first did this. So now, I just started this process with St. Jake's. It's very different. We're small and we're old, and they haven't had a steady pastor since 2008, of more than a few years. But I feel like they're ready to focus, to figure out where God is calling us now. So we're starting this process, and for me, I try to tell them this isn't about me at all. This is about you. This is your congregation. You're making these decisions. All I'm doing is compiling all your answers.
Yeah, we're the body of Christ, so we should be
In
acting
the
that way.
fall, they're going to vote on the priorities we've already discussed.
Interesting. That's a good process.
I was just going to share, after 40 years attending the same church, my wife and I felt compelled to find another church because the one we were in was stuck in a rut and would not change. Went through about a year and a half O&A process, which ended very painfully in a 51-49% split vote. And it got, when you talk about mean, there's no room for mean in the church. It was very mean. And as a consistory member, having the F-bomb dropped on me in the church and in the parking lot, got to a point where we just couldn't live that anymore. We needed to leave a church, not because of what they necessarily did, but what they are not willing to become and open their eyes. And we were looking for a church that, had a let's try this attitude and is willing to try things. It may not always work, but hey, let's try it and live and learn. And we're enjoying now a church that the young families didn't want to support and work at pot pie dinners and making pies and making soup. They said, could we do an Oktoberfest? And the young families run the Oktoberfest, get the beer and insurance licenses and all that kind of stuff. We go volunteer and have a blast. So it's out there, but it's a shame not more are willing to have that let's try attitude.
And let me be clear that change it takes courage. And in the beginning, in the beginning of the Hebrew Scriptures, whenever someone is sent out on a mission or whatever, a person sends them out and says, be strong and have courage. So the only thing that doesn't change is that everything changes. And we don't change for the sake of change. Again, it's always for me, it's always we change for the sake of Jesus. If something is needed, if there's something in your community that needs to be done, addressed, people stood with, you do that because that's what Jesus calls us to. And we have done a lot of things that have brought a lot of hate mail on us. But, I care more about what God thinks, right? And that's not an easy thing to live to, and I don't always do it, but we have to do our best to try. Thank you all for being here. It's really good. Thank you.
And it's round and it has a banister around it and all the seating is around but the rest of the windows are all natural windows. There's a bunch of natural lighting. Yeah, it was built in 1960 something. It's not one of the ones. Yeah, it's not one of the ones for like the 1800s. They're really nice.
I'll see you somewhere along here.
Yeah.